door slammed shut behind my partner with a resonant metallic clang, leaving me alone in the silence of the spacious store. It was my first time on the night shift, completely solo in a massive electronics megastore, where my only companions were refrigerators and toasters. The realization sent a dull, unpleasant ache through my stomach. No, being a security guard wasn't exactly my dream career, but the pay was reliable, and I didn't have much of a choice. After graduation, as a young specialist with zero experience, no one wanted to hire me. A classic story, but a man has to eat. Besides, I don't have wealthy parents with spare apartments or high-end connections. So, I took the job as a guard. The work seemed simple enough. Sit in the security booth, watch the monitors, and occasionally do a patrol of the floor. If you hear Vince, don't let it spook you, my partner had chuckled before leaving. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, and didn't care to ask. Local humor, I figured. Though, to be honest, that smirk of his unnerved me far more than I wanted to admit. Left to myself, I looked around. The store was beautiful, one of the best in the city, or so they told me during the interview. But now, at night, everything looked different. The glossy display cases reflected the pale glow of the emergency lights. Long rows of electronics shelves stretched into the distance, disappearing into the shadows and forcing my imagination to sketch something sinister in the dark. The ceiling, high and curved like the dome of a cathedral, hummed with a low, monotonous vibration. The sound of the ventilation seemed unnaturally loud in the nocturnal silence. I yawned, brewed myself a strong coffee, and sat down at the monitors, lazily switching between camera feeds. The screens showed the same thing: motionless aisles, quiet halls. My anxiety began to fade. After a couple of hours, I thought, why am I, a grown man, so jumpy? Suddenly, a sound drifted up from below. Not loud, but distinct, like a heavy thud against a wall. I tensed instantly, my drowsiness vanishing. I straightened up and glued my eyes to the screen. The first-floor cameras showed total order. Everything in the halls was in its place. The warehouse looked peaceful too. Long rows of boxes and pallets stood in perfect lines. No movement at all. I hesitated for a second or two, but my sense of responsibility for the new job took over. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed downstairs. Descending the staircase, I felt the space around me shift. Upstairs, there was at least some illusion of comfort, but down here, it was cold, smelling of damp cardboard and plastic. I walked cautiously along the walls, listening to my own footsteps echoing hollowly through the empty room. Finally, I stopped at the door leading to the storage area. Everything looked normal. Rows of boxes stood straight and tall, like soldiers on parade. But my eyes snagged on one large cardboard box containing a TV. It was jutting out crookedly from the row, as if someone had accidentally bumped into it or put it back carelessly. Strange, I muttered, stepping closer. Just a minute ago, the cameras showed that box was perfectly aligned, almost flush against the wall. I reached out, intending to straighten it. At that exact moment, a muffled thud erupted from behind the wall. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. I froze, listening. The thud repeated. Heavy, dull, as if someone were striking concrete from the other side of the wall. But what could be behind it? I vaguely remembered the evacuation plan. There was nothing behind that wall. No room, no other section. I took a step back. My flashlight beam danced frantically across the wall, as if hoping to find an answer. Nothing. In that moment, my nerves snapped. Panic rose from the pit of my stomach and tightened around my throat. I spun around and, barely seeing where I was going, bolted back upstairs. The stairs rumbled under my feet. My breath came in ragged gasps. I stumbled, but managed to reach the security booth, slamming the door shut behind me. Feeling cold, sticky sweat coat my back. Standing before the monitors, I tried to calm my racing heart. My hands shook as if I had just run a marathon. There was a sound behind that wall. There was no mistake. It wasn't my imagination, not a creaking pipe, not random noise. Someone or something was there. But how? What could exist where the blueprints show only a solid wall and empty space? I sat there until dawn, eyes glued to the monitors, but nothing else happened. The store breathed with night silence, as if nothing had occurred. Only my heart continued to throb, reminding me that this was no dream. Morning came slowly and reluctantly. When the dawn finally chased away the night shadows, I heard the front door open. My relief arrived, a different shift worker. Noticing my exhausted look, he just smirked. "Why are you so pale?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "Did you meet Vince?" I swallowed and tried to force a smile, but it didn't quite work. "I don't know about Vince," I muttered, "but someone was banging on the warehouse wall last night, hard enough to knock a box out of line." My partner laughed shortly, looking at me with a touch of pity, and shrugged. "Don't sweat it, rookie. Stuff happens here sometimes. Walls hum, pipes knock. It's an old building. Your mind plays tricks on you. And that box was probably already like that. One of the loaders probably set it crooked. It happens. We even joke about it, saying the ghost of a guard named Vince lives here. He used to work here. Then. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, don't let it get to you." I nodded, trying to look convinced, but I couldn't calm down. I returned home, agonizing over the previous night. In the bright afternoon sun, my nighttime fears seemed childish and foolish, but the thought of a second night shift filled me with heavy dread. By the evening of the next day, I forced myself to return to the store. I didn't want to quit the job after just one strange night. It felt wrong, cowardly. I firmly decided, if nothing happened tonight, it meant I was just overworked, and everything was fine. At first, it was quiet. I even started to relax, feeling the cold, sticky knot of anxiety slowly dissolve in my chest. I drank some coffee and took a walk through the sales floor. An ordinary evening, ordinary emptiness and silence. Only the dim flicker of emergency lights played on the smooth surfaces of the display cases, casting flickering shadows on the walls, like thin tentacles crawling upward. I took my time returning to the post, listening to the dull rustle of the ventilation and the quiet pops and cracks that always appear in old buildings when the night takes over. And then, behind my back, the elevator buzzed deafeningly. The sound was so out of place, so alien, that my whole body flinched. I turned around, listening in shock. There was no one in the store. All entrances were locked, the alarm was set, but the elevator was moving slowly on its own. The numbers above the display lit up and faded, reflecting in the glass of the display cases. The elevator was traveling from the basement level straight up to me. My stomach lurched. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. I dove toward a row of washing machines, hid behind one, and sat perfectly still, listening to the hum of the elevator. Quiet and indifferent, like the breath of something living and ancient hidden in the bowels of the building. Maybe it's a technical glitch, I thought, and immediately after, I heard something else, a human groan, low and mournful. My heart skipped a beat again. Panic began to wash over me in waves, intensifying with every rotation of the mechanism. Someone was in that elevator. A person. I shook with fear. Finally, the elevator stopped. I heard the doors open, and then nothing. I cautiously peered out. The cabin was empty. Only the light bulb inside flickered restlessly, casting strange reflections on the walls and floor. I carefully crept out of my hiding place and looked around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was only emptiness. Only me, alone among the shimmering display cases and shadows that seemed to grow deeper and heavier by the minute. Returning to my post, I could no longer relax. My hands shook. My breathing was shallow. I tried to stare at the monitors, telling myself it was an equipment failure, a simple coincidence. But then, one of the cameras, the one pointed at the television aisle, showed movement. A shadow flickered across the screen. Fast, light, barely discernible. I squinted intensely, trying to see what was happening. Nothing clear, just a brief ripple in the gloom, like the shadow of a person sliding past a display and vanishing around a corner. I grabbed my flashlight and took a deep breath, feeling panic wake up in my chest again, and slowly went to investigate. As I descended into the hall, I noticed the flashlight beam jumping nervously in my hand, like a searchlight in a storm. Entering the aisle, I froze. For a second, it felt like someone was watching me from deep within the hall, behind the glass of the display cases, waiting. And suddenly, the televisions roared to life on their own, one after another, as if by some invisible command. White noise instantly filled the room with hissing and crackling, a low, monotonous hum tearing the silence to shreds. Static flickered across the screens like distorted faces and figures trying to claw their way out. And then I heard the voice clearly. Weak, hoarse, pleading, barely audible through the noise and static.
"Let me out."
I lunged toward the nearest TV, frantically hitting the power button. I could feel my fingers trembling with fear and helplessness, but it continued to hiss. The static danced across the screen, mockingly distorting my reflection. The other televisions didn't react to the buttons either, as if they had gone out of control. In desperation, I ran back to the post and cut the main power, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Instant, deafening darkness fell. Only my flashlight trembled in my hand, a weak, dim spot of light, almost powerless against this ocean of gloom. I stood in the middle of the dark, dead store and realized dawn was still a long way off. My heart hammered wildly, refusing to settle. I tried to convince myself that nothing terrible had happened. Just, I don't know, technical interference or a very cruel joke by the other guards. But the voice that hissed from the TVs was still ringing in my ears, quietly repeating its grim demand. Let me out. No, that's enough of this circus, I thought, listening to the darkness, trying not to flinch as the old office chair creaked under my weight. I'd sit here until morning, then to hell with this job, this store, and all its goddamn madness. I sat staring into the gloom, which seemed to be thickening around me, feeling the night darkness slowly tighten its grip, creeping closer and closer. Suddenly, a distinct sound came from below. A crash. As if something heavy had fallen. I leaped to my feet, feeling cold, viscous fear slide down my spine again. The sound repeated with such force that it felt like the entire floor vibrated. I instinctively looked at the monitor. but it was off. Of course, I had cut the power myself. My heart beat even faster. I had to gather my courage and check again. If there were thieves and I just sat up here, I wouldn't be able to prove anything later. Gripping the flashlight, I slowly descended the stairs, listening to every step echo in the total silence. The darkness below was almost tactile. It felt like it was wrapping me in a thick, damp blanket. When I reached the storage area, the flashlight beam caught an unexpected sight. The boxes that had recently stood in a perfect, flawless wall were now strewn everywhere, pushed, scattered, as if someone huge and angry had tossed them aside in a fit of rage. And then, a strike. The wall in front of me literally shuddered, and the vibration caused the boxes to shift slightly. I broke into a cold sweat. How was this possible? There shouldn't be any rooms behind that wall, but the blows continued, methodical and strong, as if someone were desperately trying to break out. I slowly moved closer, pushing boxes aside, trying to ease the sticky horror crushing my chest. I started moving them hesitantly at first, then faster, until I discovered something that sent a cold wave down my spine. Hidden behind the piles was a door, an ordinary metal door with peeling paint, behind which I was certain there should be nothing but a concrete wall. But it was there, absolutely real, and the muffled thuds were coming from right behind it. I took a step back, and at that moment, a voice came from behind the door.
"Let me out. I don't want to be alone."
The voice sent a jolt of heat through me. There was a person in there, a trapped person. Forgetting my fear, I rushed to the door, feverishly pulling out my ring of keys. My hands shook, the keys jingled, and like a madman, I shoved them into the lock one by one, trying to find the right one. "Just a second, hold on!" I shouted in a trembling voice. Finally, the lock gave way with a soft click. The door swung inward with a nasty metallic screech, revealing an old security post, almost identical to mine upstairs, but clearly abandoned years ago. Dusty monitors, a dirt-covered console, and a chair. The air held a stale, suffocating smell of dampness. Inside, there was no one. Not a soul, not a movement. Even the air seemed stagnant and dead. I stood on the threshold of that room, trying to understand what had just happened, where the voice had vanished, and who, for God's sake, had been banging so desperately from the inside, begging to be let out. The room was empty, as if no one had ever been there. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, trying to leap out. I stood there, trying to process it all. The flashlight beam swept nervously over the old monitors and the dusty control panel. The silence was so thick and tangible it felt alive. A thought hammered in my head. This is impossible. A minute ago, someone was here. Someone was calling out, hitting the door, screaming in despair and loneliness. And now, nothing. Just a frozen, derelict room. Suddenly, the flashlight beam caught some writing on the wall. "I don't want to be alone." Next to it were finger marks, and the writing itself looked as though it had been done in blood. With great effort, I forced myself to turn around, left the room, and gently pulled the door shut, as if afraid to wake something that might still be hiding in the dark. I walked back upstairs, slowly. The steps under my feet felt viscous, like I was walking through a swamp. The sensation of a strange gaze burned the back of my neck, and even when I locked myself in the booth, it didn't go away, as if someone were watching me from the dark corners. I spent the rest of the night clutching the flashlight, which flickered on and off due to a weak battery. With every passing minute, the tension eased slightly, but the realization of what had happened wouldn't let me rest. The strange door, the invisible guest, and that haunting voice repeating, "Let me out." Morning came reluctantly, foggy and gray, as if the sky itself was afraid to chase away the night. I heard the lock of the front door click below. I felt a wave of relief, however faint. A different shift worker entered, but not the one from yesterday. This was an older guard I had only seen once when I was hired. A man in his 50s, graying, with observant and slightly tired eyes. Everyone here just called him Old Sam. He noticed my state immediately and nodded silently, as if unsurprised. "Rough night?" he asked calmly, as if it were routine. "I'm not coming back here. This place, it isn't normal," I stammered. The words tangled, refusing to form a story. "Look, something is happening here. Something bad. I didn't just hear noises. There were voices, and a door downstairs, and no one behind it. Though someone was definitely there, I heard them." He looked at me intently, seriously studying me, and then said quietly, "So, you let him out?" I flinched, feeling a chill run down my spine. Who? Who did I let out?" The guard sighed tiredly, rubbed his face as if deciding whether to continue, then nodded to himself. "It was a long time ago, maybe 10 years, he began, sitting on the office chair. "I had just started. There was this one guard, a young kid. He was a bit different, you know? Not all there. Simple-minded, trusting, a fool, to put it bluntly." He paused, frowning. "The guys who worked here back then liked to play jokes on him, and one day they crossed the line. They locked him in the old security booth downstairs. Just a joke, they thought. They went out for lunch. When they came back a couple of hours later and opened the door, they saw bloodstains on the walls. The kid had beaten his head against the concrete, you see, and he'd written on the wall in blood, 'I don't want to be alone.' When they opened the door, he was already dead. No one told anyone he'd been locked in there. They wrote it off as a mental breakdown, said the kid was just sick in the head. He snapped, and that was it. They moved the security post upstairs, blocked that door with boxes, and forgotten. Or rather, they tried to forget." I was silent, feeling an icy horror slowly penetrate every corner of my consciousness, displacing the last remains of calm. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and stood up, grabbing my jacket. "Yeah," the old man said quietly. "So it's true, you let him out. The brave ones always do, braver than our local thugs. They can only laugh, but you know, they're terrified to stay here at night. They feel something, but they pretend everything is fine. That's why they joke about the ghost. Hell, even I couldn't listen anymore. My legs carried me outside into the gray, foggy morning. Returning home, I immediately wrote a resignation letter and sent it by mail. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying not to think about the night's events. Though the old man's words and the image of the empty room with that horrific message on the wall remained burned into my mind. The next morning, a phone call woke me. It was the store. I answered with trepidation. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was nervous, strained. "Listen, I saw the resignation, but we have a crisis. Can you come in for a shift tonight? We need someone urgently. There's been a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked hoarsely, feeling my heart begin to race again. "It's Sam. They found him dead at the post this morning. Looks like he snapped or something. He did it to himself. Look, can you just come in tonight?" I said nothing. My hand began to shake. Cold paralyzed my entire body. Without a word, I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and, saying nothing, hung up.